excited to be here. Hope you're excited too. And we're gonna spend a minute to switch the presentation. I'm sorry. Let's do it. All right, here it is. So, like Gun said, I'm coming here to talk about a little bit our systems and how they have helped Airbnb to develop products. And so, just briefly about me, I grew up in Finland, just across the pond there, but I've been living in San Francisco for the last 5 years. And originally I went there to start my own company, which was part of Y Combinator there, and then I later led the design at Coinbase. For the last 2 years, I've been working at Airbnb on the design system. So I was there to work on it on the beginning, in the middle, and now we are still in the middle. And you maybe heard about design systems. They are kind of like this new hot thing. And I think it's cool. Like you go to Medium, and there's probably like a new design post every week. And I think there is more to it. It's not just like they're cool, but there's actually good reasons to do these things. And that's why the companies are also investing in. The first of all, I think there's a little bit, it's not always that clear what is the design system. I don't know if it needs to be that defined. This is like maybe my definition. So what I think a design system is just a set of shared and integrated patterns and principles that define the overall product or the design of the product. And the keywords there is the integrated part, because I think it's different with a design style guide, which I think is often used as a reference. You don't really build the design, or like you don't design with it, or definitely you don't build with it. So I think the integration is important for a design system to work well. The other part is the shared thing. So there's this architect, Christopher Alexander. He's also written books about pattern language and also other books. And he talks about this problem that you often probably face, that you have a group of people, you try to design something, everyone has a little bit different ideas. It doesn't like exactly come together as a perfect, like nice design. So it's challenging. So he thinks that like there is a way to fix this. That the way to fix this is that if that group of people share a common pattern language, they can design better together. They can almost design as well as just a one person could. So I think the other part is like, why now? Like, why I haven't been doing this for a long time? I think it's just like sometimes these things just happen. Like, I think one thing is that just like as a designers and developers, I think our work has gone much more complex. We just heard about accessibility. That's like one part that you have to think about a lot of different kinds of users. You have to make sure that the designs are accessible. You have to also do it on the engineering side. So all of these things that you have to think different devices. So these things add up, and like it's harder to actually design. Also, the companies are generally moving to faster development cycles. So instead of taking months or years to develop products, you develop them in weeks, or you launch new features every day. And that means that like you cannot rely on some kind of manual process of like keeping everything in check. I think also that people's expectations of apps and services have gone much increased. Because like maybe if you think about 10, 15 years ago, that the first apps that came out on iOS, they weren't what we have today. And that way, you have to build much more, like people expect really great designs, they expect polished products. Also, it's not just like, what has also happened is that everyone is using this product. So everyone is using smartphones. So if your product might get millions or hundreds of millions or billions of users, and that means that you can found a business upon that, and that's and even like pretty big business. So that means that there's more money involved, there's more investment, and people these companies can hire larger and larger teams to actually work on these problems. So, but all of these things can like contribute to the fact that it's getting like harder to keep everything in check. So just talking about the scale, generally, how do you do products? You have some kind of team, they come up with a product, they create some kind of app or some kind of service. I mean, obviously it's not that simple. Like now we have multiple platforms. Just like a mobile product, you might have to do it on 2 platforms. Often it's not also that simple that there's only one team. There might be multiple teams with multiple designers. And then, truthfully, it even get more complex. Like in a bigger company, you might have different business units with different teams. They have different strategies, and they all execute on those. And then you also start to add more and more different platforms where you try to serve your product. So what happens is like there isn't actually this product that in the middle that somehow keeps track of everything. What happens is that the teams are moving fast and like developing their own features when they need to on the platforms they want to. So what starts happening is it starts to get a little messy. And so you start to see things like the apps are no longer consistent or coherent. The features between the different apps or different platforms might not be the same. So you might have features on Android, you might have different features on iOS. And that creates some issues that it starts to become increasingly harder for anyone to add new features or change them. Because you always have to think about like, well, how do I do it in Android? Because it's like different there. And then that slows things down. So that was the case with Airbnb too, that like we had run the company had been running for many years, and we basically have 6 different products. So we had the tablet apps, we had phone apps, and we had the web apps. So all of these apps were kind of like, they were similar to each other, but slightly different. But those slightly differences just ended up multiplying over time, that it became harder and harder for teams to develop new features. So we realized that this is a problem, and we kind of like had the same kind of realization what was happening. So we started like thinking like how to fix this. So what I think the design system is kind of creating is it's not just design, but it's also it needs to solve some of the organizational issues. So it needs to like create this some kind of environment and some kind of process and some kind of a common shared ground where the people can, the different teams can contribute things, and there are certain rules that the system is governed by, and that way we can have a little bit more sanity into the product development. So what I think like first thing is like the design systems are not necessarily about design all the time. I think half of the work is actually just about the organization and how you develop products. So if you're building your design system, thinking about it, you might have to also think about how you might have to change the organization to do that well. So what about the design? So I also want to mention that like with any kind of design system, I like to think that we built this design system for our needs, for our goals, and the things we wanted to fix. So while listening to this, keep in mind that like your company might be different, and you should think about the things that you want to solve, the things you want to make happen. So you might get some ideas from here, but you should still think about your own needs. So one way to illustrate this, that like there's many different kinds of design systems, and people sometimes compare them to each other. But I think they're not all the same. They're not all for the same purpose. So for example, if we think about the execution of like how atomic or how modular the design is, that's one thing. Atomic meaning that it's made of more smaller parts, which means that it's in some ways more flexible and allows more different permutations of things. So you can create many different things. And then also sometimes the companies are either creating these things for more narrow domain or like a problem area, or very wide problem area. So for example, Bootstrap, everyone knows it probably, it's like a collection or a pattern library of common web UI elements. And it was created for Twitter, but now it's like meant for everyone. So everyone can use it to build their apps. You can also customize it. So in a way, it's very created for like many people. The material design is similar, that they actually also want that you use it for your apps, your website, but it also has a little bit more this kind of principles and like actual a way of designing things. And then there's this kind of problem that if you try to create the whole universe, then the atomic system is actually pretty great for that. So you have just like some bunch of atoms, some energy, and you can create anything in the universe. But often that's not the scale like a lot of us are working on. There's also the Legos. They're often referenced a lot often. And I think it's more, again, like atomic. You have small pieces, but you can only create things like a plastic structure. You cannot really use it for a lot of things. And then there's something like our system, which we built for Airbnb for our product. So we have one product, and we are in a certain business. We're in a travel and hospitality business. And so everything in that system is like made for this purpose. So about the product. So for example, this is our iOS app, and this shows the listing where you can stay. And this is just one part of it. And this is one designer might work on it, 10 designers might work on it, a team might work on it at some point. And so it's always iterated because it's one of the most important screens. But that's not the only screen. There's hundreds of these screens that are all worked by different designers, different teams at different times. So all of these screens are created by completely different people, but they're following a certain language. So how did we get there? So talking about like diving deeper, what this view is made of. So like I said, we also have a pattern library or a component library, and in our case, we think that the components should be functional units, so they are not pieces of something. The component itself should have a purpose, and it should be functional by itself. This means that the components generally are a little bit larger than in some other systems, but we think that it simplifies things. And this way, we can always kind of like, we also name them. So we try to use more general names that describe what the component is for, what is the purpose. And this way, we can also create a language around the interfaces. All of these components are then based on certain principles, like this kind of primitives, or like this kind of values. We call them primitives. So the typography, different sizes, letter spacing, weights, also the colors, as well as the spacing units that lay out the components. And all of these are set in the system. We can add new ones, or we can change the existing ones. And then, and for the spacing, we use this 8-pixel or 8-point increments or 8-point grid to lay out the components. And so when a designer starts working on a page like this, they can find these components in their sketch. And then if another designer starts working on another project, for example, this is the hosting tool, so you get new information about new reservations. So both of these teams can now use the same components. So we encourage people to use the existing ones because obviously it's more efficient and it's like helps the consistency. But if you can't, then you can easily create new ones. So in this case, there's some other teams created new kinds of components. For example, that the things on the right, or actually here, this is like a version of the home marquee that has like a little bit bigger picture because they wanted to like for the trips or the experiences provide this more immersion for the experience. And this is not only a design system, it's also like an engineering system. So all of this, we have built this design system from the beginning to be also a framework for engineers. So for example, if the engineer gets this view, they can just look up the names of the components. So they can look up the user details row, navigation, home marquee, and using those names, they can reference the components from their library. And then we have built this framework on iOS, on Android, and then it also supports the tablets. So all the components can also adapt to different sizes, and sometimes there's more rules that you can use, like if you have like one listing card on a tablet, you can have 2 of them side by side or 3 of them side by side. So there's a little bit more layout options and flexibility. But generally, this means that a designer can just create one design, and it can work on our platforms. So it makes it much more easier to design new things. So in the beginning, when we did this work, we managed to build most of the app for maybe with 40 different components. Now we have maybe 140. So we have added a lot, but we also added much more into the product, as well as added much more new features that we didn't have in the beginning. One cool thing is also with this that once you have all these components laid out, it's much easier to do holistic changes. So if you want to just, I don't like this way of doing things anymore, or you want to just change the styling, it's very easy to do. So you get to look at all the marquees and try to I want to change that, I don't know, this text size, or I want to make it not bold or something, and I can do it to all of them at the same time. And so when the user sees the apps, they feel that it's consistent with in different views. So this sounds great. You can just change things. So what is the actual change process? So we actually have 2 libraries. So one is that we have this core library, which is the official library, kind of like what I have been talking about so far. Those are the global and tested and shared components that we encourage people to use. Then we also have a team library that allows teams to quickly experiment and test ideas. And every quarter or so, we look at both of these libraries and audit them and see what should we move from the team libraries to the core library, what could be useful for everyone, and also what should be removed or changed. So that way we keep maintaining the system, and then through that work, the whole product gets maintained as well. And then when things enter the core library, we can then document them. We can set guidelines how to use them. We also have guidelines for content writing, and as well as the motion and layout and other things and accessibility. And then, like I said, the designers have this ability to just get these templates to Sketch, and they contain all the components that we have. So here's just a quick demo. So you can just go to your menu, you can pull down, it opens a new file. So you're not going to accidentally save over it. You have all the components laid out there in their groups, and then you can start creating your screen. We use this plugin called Sketch Runner. It's like a spotlight for your Sketch symbols. So it makes it really easy to just find things with the name. So I want to find the navigation for the specialty marquee, so I can just write it there, or I want to find the user details row, and I can just quickly drop them in. The components also have their initial spacing and all the functionality or data you can show there. So it's very easy to just drag and drop them, and they kind of stack nicely together. We also build tools. So for the whole organization, for example, this is a component browser that lives inside our main product, and it allows everyone in the company to see what the components are, what categories they are. They're actually functional. You can actually see them. You can test, click on them. You can see how they interact. You can also turn on these overlays in the app. So you can go to any view and turn on this overlay and see what are the components it's made of. We also collect data or metrics on the components. So we know that which components are the most used ones and where are they used and how they're used. So again, we want to remind you, this is what we did, and you should think about your company goals. So maybe you are not having the same challenges than we did, or maybe you're just trying to achieve different results. I think there's this urban planning saying that it's kind of, if you build roads and parking lots, people probably drive more. If you build bike lanes and public transportation, people probably use those more. So you have to be mindful about what you create in your system, because that way you can either influence things for the better or for the worse. So that's why I don't want to prescribe a certain way of doing this. You should find those ways yourself. So just like a few other examples where has this work kind of like taking out. So what are the benefits? Obviously, one is much now easier to design things. So instead of those 6 different designs, you can potentially just do one design. And that works across the iOS, Android, and sometimes even mobile web. And this also, I think it's great for us, but I think it's also great for the users because like the things look similar. Like if you are trying to find a home, it looks similar on all platforms and you don't get confused. Also, it has helped, like we just heard a lot about the inclusivity and accessibility. It's also helped us to do that. So if you can make the components accessible, and we have made those, you already won the half of the battle. Like if you make all your colors and typography and components accessible, the screen should be at least some level accessible. The other half is, of course, that you have to then go through all the different flows and screens and see if it still makes sense, like if there's things we could improve or things that we need to fix. The other thing, like what I find interesting, what has been happening to me as a designer and also other designers in the company, is that you start to like see this like abstractions or patterns. It's almost like you enter the matrix in the movie. Like at the end of the movie, you see like all that code running around. So this is like you start seeing design like it's actually like you don't look at the details anymore that much all the time, but you start to see like the patterns, like how do we present information, like what are the different layouts and these kind of things. So I think it's like brings like this interesting, different way of designing. You start to think about the general rules, like how do we should do things. For example, like this is just one example. We generally like have these components in a certain styling, in a certain color, but we are exploring also like could we allow custom theming. So like for example, if you want to create a section in the product that like uses this dark mode for some cases, or it could be also accessibility thing that some people find it easier to read, that we could allow that. And it wouldn't be only the dark mode, it could be any color mode. So there could be ways that we could actually make more interesting designs and as well as useful designs. And this way, the teams don't have to worry about this stuff. Like we worry about this stuff, like how do we build this kind of like feature into the system, and then all the teams can use that feature and they don't have to invest into these things. The other thing is like also this kind of system starts to create new ideas. So like John Gold, one of our employees, worked on this React Sketch app. It's an open source library that you can actually use today. And what it does is that it allows you to render React, like JavaScript React components or layouts to Sketch. So you can like use your actual code base to create artboards and designs in Sketch. And you might wonder like, why would you do this? Like usually it's the other way around. But actually, because we can. And then secondly, it's just like it is useful because like instead of like doing those sketch templates manually, we can actually build tools that leverage the code base and then allow designers to easily use it to find those components or use them. It also allows us to do other things, like it's not just a static design anymore. You can actually translate it on the fly and see how the design works in different languages. The same thing with the responsive design. So instead of designing just in one screen size, you can tell the program to actually show me this design in multiple sizes. So you wouldn't have to do this manually or spend the time to do it. And I think there's a lot of possibilities with this kind of technology. And so we are still exploring it, but I recommend everyone to check it out. So I think that it's also like the design systems are not only for building the products and guiding them. I think it's also can create this completely new ideas and ways of working. And just to remind that it's not about just the design, it's actually also about the organization. Like how does this kind of way of working fit into your organization? And I think that also you should always create them into your goals and needs, and you kind of can use the system to achieve those things. So if you want to fix, you want to make the products more consistent, then you can build those kind of functionalities into the design system so you can get those results. If you want that system, you want your products to be accessible, then you can build it as a requirement in the system, and then that way you can like enforce or guide people to do that. And so I think like design system can be like kind of like this your local guide. So like when you're traveling, they can like guide all the people in your company to make more holistic designs. They can also lead you on the path, on the right path. They can direct you to do the right things. And then they can also help you to design better and build better products. So thank you.